Welcome to another OCD Recovery Instagram Live. I'm going to be talking a bit about perception and doing a question and answers on here today. So in regards to perception, because it sort of lays the framework for our recovery. So how we see things and how we perceive things is based on our beliefs, and they take shifts throughout our life. So as we are going along in our lives, lots of little things are changing and we don't notice that. So say, for example, as we get older, you don't realize that you're aging until you go past certain parts in your life. And when you do that, that's when it becomes apparent that you are. So you might just suddenly at one point realize, oh, I'm an adult, or I'm a teenager, or whatever. And those things happen in little shifts, and they add up. And the same with our experiences with OCD. How long have we been stuck? How long have we been stuck on a certain theme? How are we doing in recovery? How are we seeing things? So it shifts in lots of little ways. We don't suddenly become not scared of one thing. We become less scared of it bit by bit as time passes on. And then suddenly you realize, I'm not scared of that thing I was scared of 2 years ago, or I'm seeing it differently to how I was last week or whatever. And those shifts are happening all the time, bit by bit, in little stages. And those gradual shifts in awareness begin to form the framework of what becomes recovery. So it's very important to see that, because otherwise people are stuck with something for so long that they think, I'm never going to get better. I'm stuck like this forever. This is my life. This is my lot. And they're just sort of lumping that, going along like, well, you know what? I'm putting up with this, but this is it. Well, that's not acceptance. Acceptance is something that when you are no longer frightened of it, like in my last video where I was talking about how much do you care about a football match between two teams in 1979, you don't give a damn. And that is a feeling of where you're not scared. But if you are just lumping it, you're just carrying it on your shoulders, you're like, yeah, I'm still scared, but you know what, I'm just making it through, which is an important step in the beginning initially. But you've got to get under those fears. And it's those changes in perception that are happening bit by bit that build up until eventually you're not scared anymore of the things that you once were scared of. And those shifts can't be forced. You can't just force a change in perception. It doesn't just happen like that. You don't just suddenly go and not feel anxious anymore by saying to yourself, I'm not scared, or forcing a new belief and just going over it relentlessly again and again and again, sort of hammering away. You're not going to sort of nail down unconditional self-acceptance. It's lots of shifts that come together to form a process, and a lot of that takes time. You've got to leave that to take time. The same as you wouldn't learn language like French in a week or a day. You would take time to learn it, and if you tried to force to learn it in one day, you'd be completely worn out and tired, and you wouldn't get anywhere with it. So it's really important that you take it step by step. You do reading, you watch videos, you do exposures, you do a whole part of the process, which brings it all together in small increments. And I think that's key. And so what happens is when we start doing that and viewing it as a journey that we're on, of course we're going to want instant relief. Of course we're going to want that. But that sort of jamming on for the instant relief, that sort of pushing down the accelerator whilst we're in the sand, is what's actually keeping us stuck. And actually, when we learn to take a bit of distance from it and hold ourselves back and sort of slow down the process a bit, then what happens is it actually releases quite a bit. But we need to get right under it with the ones which, like for example, for me, when I was suffering with really bad harm OCD, false memory, real event OCD in the past, I was very, very, very stuck. Okay, so until I got to a position of unconditional self-acceptance and I could really feel that and really experience that, it kind of stayed locked on to some degree in the background quite strongly. But you don't have to get to a point where you fully understand unconditional self and life acceptance to get recovered. You just need to become more accepting, so sort of putting oil on those sort of gears that are all sort of stuck up. I think that's important, but obviously achieving unconditional self-life and other acceptance makes a huge difference to your life. So it's definitely the goal and direction you want to be heading down from the beginning. Let's see if there's any questions that have come on here. Answer anything you want on here. I'm here to answer those. I'm thinking way too much. Please help me break it. Well, you can't just stop yourself thinking. You're going to think a lot. That's the nature of this disorder. So that's going to happen. So you're not going to be able to just stop yourself thinking like that. Bang. It's not going to happen. So you've got to accept, well, I'm going to think too much. As I become less scared, it's going to go down. But for the time being, I'm going to be frightened. And I am going to think a bit, because a lot of it's going to be automatic rumination. You can't cut the rumination that's happening in your head off like that. You've got to be able to. It's a process of learning to not engage, and as you become less frightened, the automatic cycle then goes down. But for the moment, you're probably still going through it all because you've built up thinking as like some kind of protective mechanism against a sort of life and death imaginary scenarios that you've planned out in your head. So it's become a sort of protective cycle where it actually isn't, because no amount of anxiety will save us from anything. It's and that's a key point that you need to remember, is that the rumination has become a protective method for you, but also because the fear is high, it's become automatic. So you need to bring that fear down. You will not be able to stop a lot of that happens in your head. And I think that's really important, because otherwise people get very frustrated. Why am I still doing that in my head? Why am I still going over in that cycle? And that is absolutely key. And that's the same as anything. Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I still feeling depressed? Why am I still feeling anything? And then getting so annoyed that you're still in that constant state, and then further disabling yourself by going in on yourself again and beating yourself up further for something which is actually playing out to you rather than you having control at this point, because your awareness and your perception is not in a position yet to enable that to come down. And I think that's absolutely crucial. Yes, I will save the live. The last one I didn't save, the sensory motor one, you can find on Instagram TV on this page, but it's not on the YouTube channel and it's not on the Facebook page. How am I doing? I'm very good. I'm well. The weather is very nice at the moment, and I'm working outside, and I'm getting a lot of things done for this YouTube channel, which I aim to sort of produce 300-400 videos. So there's loads of free content covering OCD. So all of you who can't come in to see me for the group or one-to-one coaching can get help on here as well, in a format that gives you information to help you along your journey. It is difficult to recover when you're not working with someone one-to-one or in a group format like that. It's difficult sometimes because you're often stuck on something that you can't see where you're stuck. So it's often even when you're reading books and so on, and I was reading books to get better, it's only when someone else is looking at you and seeing the problem that they can often spot things that you haven't noticed. So that's the difference between what I do in the form of one-to-one and group coaching versus the written material and video material I produce. But I try and make it as close to as I can get. But everyone's unique and everyone's OCD is latching in various different ways. So it often helps for people to come in and see me to get some pointers, even in one session, to get some pointers of what direction, so they can then go off on their own working with things if they can't afford to come in for the one-to-one and group. But the main reason I'm doing all the free content is so that people have a lot of information if they're in places, like a lot of people come to me from countries where the exchange rate it makes coming to see me expensive, or they're in positions where they're out of work for various different economic problems that they have in their countries. So doing this free content on YouTube, I aim to change a lot of that by giving people a lot of free content, because I was always frustrated on my own journey how little free content there was, and people always were trying to sort of say, well, if anything that you needed, you had to come in and pay, and I wanted to produce as much as I could, hence why I'm doing the books as well, so that people have books to help them with the OCD recovery journey, which I'm doing. And I think my book will be a game changer for OCD. I'm absolutely sure of that. So I think that's a key point in terms of how you approach things. It's going to involve a lot of reading. It's going to involve a lot of videos. It's going to involve a lot of practice, exercise, and so on. You're never going to find. It's not a process that you're going to do without quite a bit of work, and you have a lot of content there, both on these social media resources and YouTube and so on, so that you can go learn a lot and boost your knowledge of the disorder. And I think that's very important. I think more and more content. Obviously, that's how we're changing awareness. Social media and YouTube is the future formats of books a lot today, because people can reach a much larger audience in a shorter time, and are able to adapt and bring out new material constantly that changes things that they weren't able to do when it was in a printed format, having to wait for each release of the book, and then not able to change the format other than in written format to visual, video, audio, and so on. So that's what I'm doing with that, in forms of podcast, video, and what you're watching with me now. Okay, now let's have a go back to these questions. Sorry if I went a bit off topic there. I just wanted to cover some of those points. I've accepted my fear, but I get scared sometimes and have headaches. I tell myself, even if things were real, I can get through it. Using the methods you've taught in your sessions, is this called unconditional self-acceptance? I've accepted my fear, but I get scared sometimes and have headaches. Tell myself, even if things were real, I can get through it. Yeah, it's unconditional self-acceptance. People are very scared of how do they apply it. What if they're not applying it correctly? What if they're still stuck? It's exactly what it says on the tin. It's unconditional. It means there's no conditions. Humans genuinely apply a method of conditional self-acceptance, which implies that only when they meet certain conditions do they accept themselves. Whether it is, do I get a certain job? Do I have a certain partner? Do I look a certain way? So going back to unconditional self-acceptance, set out by Albert Ellis, the founder of CBT, was to enable people to see that how they behave or mistakes they make doesn't write off their life, because that is the problem. What you're doing is you're writing off yourself for one bad action. And so OCD zooms in like a homing missile for that specific thing, and it's always looking to create a thing that would mean that you will not accept yourself anymore under your current philosophy of conditional self-acceptance. So it's easy for it to come up with things like that. It can go, okay, well, I think I'm bad if I do X. I think that if I had treated someone like this, or had committed a certain crime, whatever, and it's going to zoom in for those specific things. That's what it wants to grip on. So I think that's key to note. What's the difference between reassurance and acceptance? Reassurance, you're trying to show yourself that something won't happen. Acceptance is getting under, even if it did, under a worst case scenario, and making peace and giving up internal control with that through that process. It's very different. So if you were scared of getting HIV, for example, you'd be trying to prove you don't have HIV. Acceptance would be going to show you, well, what if you did have HIV, and accepting and making peace with that. So giving up that search, that chase to get away, and going towards. For bookings for sessions, if you just email info@ocdrecovery.com, that's the easiest way to reach us for OCD bookings, or DM on Instagram or any of the social media platforms. Do you think people pass on OCD when giving birth? I think in some cases, yes. Obviously, there's a percent. We don't know, it's rough. We don't know as a percentage, but yes, it often does get passed on in birth. Things that you can do to help prevent that for when raising children is getting them taking risks, not being over controlling, over protective, and being getting them treatment as soon as you notice it, yeah, those are the main things that lead to it tend to lead to it becoming more of a problem. But you obviously can't avoid it, because there's a genetic component there. Most likely, I would imagine. I believe, but the science is still out on it, that OCD is always a genetic disorder, that we always have the genes there. Maybe certain life events turn it on, but in most cases it was going to turn on itself. Rob, I feel like there's a constant cycle going on in the background, latching onto anything, so it's constantly going, but I try not to go with it. Yeah, it's constantly looking, like I mentioned with that homing missile situation, to try and catch you on something. It's constantly scanning, constantly looking for that, because it's basically our safety mechanism tuned up, and it's just too in tune, like a faulty smoke alarm that's going off at anything. And so that's what it's doing. That's the process. So just being aware of its nature and how it operates is key. Sexual images coming into your head, you've got to welcome them and allow them. If you're trying to get rid of them, that's the problem. You've just got to leave them to come in and not try and push them away. Is the first part. You're not going to get rid of OCD like that on its own. We have to change your relationship with those images, because you'll have things that you believe most likely about them. It makes me a bad person. It's wrong to have this. And We need to look at that and get under that. Will my book touch upon GAD? My book will touch upon OCD specifically. It won't be going into GAD, but I do cover GAD on here, and panic disorder and so on. Is unconditional self-acceptance basically anything you can do will make you, nothing will make you hate yourself? Yeah, in a way, yes. If you recover from sensory motor OCD, will you still be scared of your breath? No, you won't be scared of your breath anymore, because that's what the recovery is. Yes, it's about not writing yourself off under any circumstances. Because OCD is always going to come up with anything and look for anything to catch us on. It's deliberately, we're working so that we don't get stuck on anything it can come up with at all. And that is what recovery is all about. And that's what we're doing. Does any exposures or acceptance exist to deal with constant fatigue? Constant fatigue is an anxiety symptom resulting from you being scared in fight or flight mode for a long time. So that adrenaline pumping and the sensitized nerves from the anxiety is keeping that state coming in and out. And that state can stay on a lot of the day, on and off, or come back and forth at different times. Fatigue was one that I had for a long time. And it's about working through that, getting the right rest, the right exercise, the right food, even with it going on. You know, when you've got strong physical symptoms of anxiety, it is like living with a disease at times, it feels like, but we do have the tools to get better, and it just takes time to implement those. Schizophrenia will present as hearing voices, like us hearing voices, or spotting sounds and images and some kinds of visual sensations, often before going to bed and so on, that will convince the sufferer that they are in a position where they have schizophrenia. Yeah, reassurance is not the way to go under any circumstances. During a lockdown and a quarantine scenario, it's obviously going to make mental health challenges more difficult for people. But obviously when you come out of lockdown, you'll have plenty of opportunities for that to change. But now it's sort of a one day at a time approach, keeping yourself occupied as best you can. But there's not much you can do about it in these circumstances, but you have plenty of time now to work on the reading, videos, and all of these kinds of things to give yourself the best chances. And with distraction and all of these elements, you've got a great time to work on yourself, and not with keeping your health healthily distracted, not trying to run from it, bringing OCD for the ride. You can do in the house by reading, by exercise, by watching film, anything. So you can do those, but you don't want to just be sitting around. But the other problem is that people are using phones on their phone too much, on computer games too much, these things. So you want to watch that kind of usage during this time as well. Right, guys, I am going to see you on the next Instagram Live. Be back up here in the next day or so. So I will see you guys on here then. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Take it easy.